It is a fact that culture starts from the top and grows from the bottom. In today's panel, we'll explore the first part of that statement on how to lead an inclusion and diversity-based culture starting from the top. And from the top of the top, we've selected a phenomenal panel today to share with us what they have done and what they will continue doing in this regard. So good morning, everyone. I'm Nadim Yared. I'm the CEO of CVRx, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator today. And I'm so looking forward in here to hear about what Antoinette, Tom, and Mike will be sharing with us today. But first, let me turn to Antoinette. If you don't mind introducing yourself, we'd love to know who you are. And then I'll turn it to Mike and then Tom in that order. So Antoinette.
Thanks, Nadim, and thanks for having me here. I'm the CEO of Terumo Blood and Cell Technologies. We make the equipment that collects and separates blood and cells. So if you've ever had a blood transfusion or a stem cell transplant, you may have been exposed to our products. I joined Terumo 4 years ago and became the CEO about 18 months ago. And leading a division for a Japanese company creates its own perspective around diversity. But it's been a terrific journey so far.
Yeah, my name is Mike Mussallem. I'm the chairman and CEO of Edwards Lifesciences. So we focus on structural heart disease and critical care medicine, and we're a very global company and very proud, and we work hard to be innovators in our space. We've got about 15,000 employees around the world, so quite global. I have been in this role for 20 years, so it makes me one of the veterans around here. And I guess I'll also say that I'm a veteran of AdvaMed. I've been part of the leadership at AdvaMed very proudly for many years and get a great deal of value from being with my peers and learning from them and working together on the items of common importance. And this one, diversity and inclusion, is one that has a special place for me.
Thank you, Mike. You've been a mentor to me included, so I appreciate the days we spent together at AdvaMed. Thank you for your leadership. And Tom, you're the new kid in the block in here.
Yeah, thanks, Nadim, and thanks for having me today. So I'm Tom Polen, President and CEO of Becton Dickinson, 70,000 employees across our life science, medical, and interventional segments. And I joined BD about 20 years ago from a startup company that was one of the first folks in that we sold to BD. Actually lived in Japan for a while, setting up that business, Antoinette, and as well as in Europe and Latin America. And then left BD for a bit followed my wife, who was in active duty military, was an officer there, and left as she was deployed, and then came back when she left the military and continued on her training as a cancer surgeon, just focusing on a fellowship, and rejoined BD at that point in time, and have been back with BD about probably 10 or 12 years. So great to be here today and really looking forward to talking about this topic.
Thank you, Tom. Very nice meeting you as well virtually today. Doing this online and virtually has its own complications. So what we'll try to do today is do it in order. So I'll have to play a little bit more role than I usually I would sit down and watch all three just debate it among themselves. But in here, I have to play the chief of orchestra and giving at least cues to everybody in turn. So I do apologize for this, but let's start and we'll try to change the orders. And if there is any possibility of intervening or piling up or building upon somebody else's comment, please, by all means, panelists, please do so. My first question, let me start with Antoinette. Antoinette, tell us a little bit here, how long has your organization been addressing inclusion and diversity? And why is inclusion and diversity important for your organization? I know you touched a little bit on this, but please take time here, go more in depth about this.
Yes, so thanks, Nadim. And unfortunately, our organization is really just getting started formally. So we have always had very high marks on inclusion. And in fact, our recent employee survey said 86% of people would recommend working here. That's impressive. But our diversity is not. And we had several incidents that were material harassment issues that have created much broader challenges, as you can imagine, that brought the issue to the fore, and I think challenged the perception that we're a nice culture, and we are, but that doesn't mean we're diverse. And we have to guard against that we're good guys element And as we started looking at the data, we saw that we have significant retention issues. As an example, higher equal numbers of people of color and white men, but have a 40% turnover rate with people of color in year one. So that tells you something about your culture. And I think, as you know, having been in the corporate environment for 30 plus years, I was a child prodigy, by the way. It is easy to say this is an indictment of people, but I think we have to remember that it's difficult to change when you don't put numbers around the problem and create an environment where you can discuss it. So we've done a lot of things to change how we hire, who interviews when we hire, how do we diversify the building blocks so that we can make progress in getting that representation. And just one data point, when I joined Terumo 4 years ago, there were 3 women in the top 150 people. So, you know, you can run those numbers. We're now at about 37%. And we did that by really saying, how do we normalize what we expect from values and talking about that transparently? What do we expect from performance and putting data around that and looking at results? And then having transparent discussions about the talent in that pipeline versus a traditional model of tapping somebody we know on the shoulder, because we tend to tap people who look like us or who we know, or, you know, so we aren't putting that objective process in place. And that has frankly led to having the best people in the job.
Yeah, some very interesting, Antoinette. Tom, let me turn to you. Same question. Can you describe here what your organization has been doing to address inclusion and diversity?
So we've been on the journey, and we still have a ways to go, but it's a huge focus for BD. About 8 years ago, we had our first associate resource group. It was our women's initiative, a very grassroots effort at the time. And I'd say now we have 9 different ARGs across the organization, just as a kind of a metric on how we've expanded. We have an Office of Inclusion and Diversity that we established a few years later, which has now evolved over the last couple of years into our Inclusion and Diversity Center of Excellence that we have at the company. And I meet with them, you know, every single month, going through how we're progressing on our goals there and the initiatives that we're implementing across the company. You know, admittedly, our early efforts, a little bit maybe like Antoinette mentioned, it started in fits and starts. But what helped us is we had, of course, 2 large transformational acquisitions that we went through. The first was CareFusion, which brought a very inclusive culture. And when we were doing those integrations, we had a spirit of take the best of the best. And one of the elements of the best was CareFusion's inclusion and diversity culture. And when we came together with them, we actually made inclusion and diversity a priority for the integration and for the culture of the new organization. And I think that's really when we saw a market improvement in our efforts, our focus, and our progress. And then when we acquired Bard, it gave us another chance to think about the culture that we wanted as a new organization. And again, we made inclusion and diversity a cultural priority. I think we all recognize and we all talk about how important it is to have the right diversity of perspectives at the table, to represent also the diversity of our patient populations that we're serving and our customers. But, you know, the other thing that I've been very focused on is, for me, one of my priorities is making sure that we're building a culture where people are comfortable to speak up, put ideas on the table, put the bad issues on the table, right? The things that are beneath the surface, that if we can get them on the surface, we can address them and before they become bigger. And if you don't have a culture where everyone feels comfortable being themselves, and that includes putting the tough issues on the table, like some of the social issues that the U.S. faced this last year. I think addressing those issues up front also shows the organization you're not here to shy away from tough topics. And in some cases, inclusion and diversity can be a tough topic for different organizations. And it really is part of building a fabric of an organization, though, that is constantly looking at getting better by having frank discussions and taking actions on those issues. And obviously, I&D is right at the top of that list for us. So.
Tom, let me follow up with a very quick question.
Yeah.
Is the same applicable globally as well? What you're talking about here in terms of what has been done through the acquisition integration, it's not only the US, right?
No, absolutely. It's all global. In fairness, as we think about our focus ex-US, it's much more on gender diversity, as the US is much heavier racial and gender diversity. I'm not saying that's not right, but that is a focus if you were to look across on a global basis.
And one comment, Nadim, as Tom referenced, when there's a lot of social unrest, we did what I think many leaders did and had a global communication across the world saying, this is what we represent, our values of respect, speak up, and we have an obligation to speak. And although that was triggered by the dynamics in the US, we received overwhelmingly positive feedback around the world from people who said, I'm proud to be here. And they brought forward their own examples from India, from Turkey, from France, right? So I think it united us in an unusual way, but having the courage, as Tom says, you have to talk about the difficult issues is a key component of this.
You can't be political, you can't be corporatized on these topics. You have to be just open, honest, and frank on these topics, right?
Yeah, it has to come from the heart. Mike, let me turn to you in here. First, tell us as well, how long has Edwards Life Science been addressing inclusion and diversity and why it's important at your organization, but also that aspect of local versus global, or the US versus OUS as well.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. It's interesting, diversity and inclusion really becomes part of the culture of the company. And I know that all of us that run organizations really prioritize culture. I know you do, Nadim, in your organization, and I'm on a panel here with Terumo and BD that have fantastic cultures. And so it's kind of in our DNA to get that right, because we know the strength of diversity and the power we get from it. In our case in particular, we really strive to be innovators, and we find that the more that we embrace diversity, the better innovators we become, because it brings these other ideas in. And when you respect other ideas and you don't end up with sort of a cookie cutter approach, we do a better job at innovation. And so it becomes kind of core to who we are and us being successful. We've been on the journey for a while, and like many companies, probably started out a little bit more unsophisticated, measuring some of the basics like gender in senior leadership and so forth. Matter of fact, I have a performance measure each year that I report to my bosses on that says, okay, we're going to constantly improve the percentage of women in senior leadership. And we've made steady progress over the years. We moved from 31 to 32 to 33%. And that's good and that's helpful, but we've become more sophisticated more recently. So for example, we have employee resource groups like many of you must have. We have 11 of them that are thriving, and with 29 chapters, things like the Edwards Network of Women and the African Heritage Forum and the Friends of Veterans, et cetera, and with chapters around the world. And so that's helping us include more people and get a little bit more sophisticated. But we know that we could be much better. And we all run our businesses with a continuous improvement mindset. We try and bring that to this and say, okay, how do we take our game up? You brought up the question of, okay, what do you do with this sort of globally? And it's the right question. And I find that we're inadequate, terribly unsophisticated in that regard, because diversity and inclusion means something very different if you go to Israel or if you go to Japan compared to what it means here. Does it mean that you're foreign born? Does it mean you just think differently? All that. And we're not really sophisticated at how to measure that, how to encourage that, but it's the next step on our journey to think about how we deploy this more, not only to be better in the US, but to be better around the world.
Yeah, fantastic. So bringing back here the discussion back to the US and to the recent painful event, our country here has heard the tremendous call to action to address the systemic racism And I will start by asking this question first to Tom. Tom, how has your organization, BD, answered this call to action, first in the US, and also if you can address as well the global aspect of it?
Yeah. So, first off, we thought it was really important to make our position publicly known. And it's probably the first time we've gone very public, very boldly on social issues. And we thought it was important to do that. So we made it very clear on social media, outside of the company, how unacceptable some of the actions were that had occurred in US society, and how we support diversity and particularly our African-American employee population. As we think about what we then did is we also, as part of it, which is not the most important thing that we did, but I think it's important that we make those investments to support beyond the company. We formed a partnership with the Institute for Equal Justice Initiative. We ended up also doing one-on-one associate donation matching to donations we made. We ended up committing $7.8 million as part of expanding community health centers, particularly in underserved communities at that point in time. And within, across the company, we ended up supporting initiatives all over, from Arizona to New Jersey to even ex-US, where we saw bottoms-up interest in helping communities improve how they're addressing these issues specifically. Most importantly, I think for us as a company, though, what we did was we held a series of fireside chats, and that may sound benign in and of themselves, but it was really, I think, a pinnacle point that we look back on today as something that shaped our culture permanently going forward. We ended up basically invited a number of leaders, including many of our senior-most African-American leaders, to share personal stories of racial injustice and discrimination, and really saw our team members just speak from their heart in a way that I've never seen before in the company. And we had over 3,000 associates just in the first chat that we had. And the feedback that I got after that was literally hundreds and hundreds of messages from associates around the company, US and ex-US, just talking about the change I've been with the company 20, 30, we've got 40-year associates, right, in BD. Never seen us tackle so directly a tough issue and have people really speak from the heart and come together to commit to do things differently inside of the company, and commit that we recognize this isn't acceptable and we're not just going to stand by and talk about it, but we're going to take action outside of the company as well. And so, that led to then our business leaders, in many cases, our regional leaders, having similar discussions where they put themselves out there and had the courage to have open, tough dialogue with the organization around the issues that were, very personal, and what they each as leaders were going to do, and what each team was going to do, not just talk about it, but actually take action around it. And we can talk about some of those later on, but those some of the actions that we took right off the bat.
Wow, thank you, Tom. Mike, let me turn to you, and I will ask the question with a slight twist, just make it a little bit more difficult. Answer the question with two different hats on your head. One is the CEO of Edwards Lifesciences, and the second is the leader in the MedTech industry on the board of AdvaMed, with the influence that you have. Because I've lived through the second one. I had the firsthand experience seeing how you've been advocating and speaking about what we should do as an industry. But we're also interested about to see what Edwards has done as well under your leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Nadim. And it's really impressive when you listen to what Tom and BD have done. That's an incredible, that's model response. And we were somewhat similar to that and tried to follow the same path. When the white hot spotlight is on, you kind of take a breath and say, okay, how do we make sure that we respond appropriately, but also know that, this need to be responses that stick and that continue even after the fact. We did a lot of listening as well. We started some listening sessions. We had 8 virtual 90-minute sessions that had more than 1,000 of our employees that participated, and they had a lot to say, and they wanted to share. And you know, it wasn't just eyewash. There was really a lot to hear. We also hired an outside firm to facilitate some panel panel discussions of our diversity groups, and we had 12 of those. And kind of similar to what Tom talked about, really an outpouring of, you know, I feel good, but here's what I don't see. Here's what could be better. When I look at the leadership, I don't see enough diversity. I don't see people like me. And, you know, why aren't we better? We also, you know, tried to think about it more broadly. You know, when it comes to the industry side, Nadim, I think we all recognize that in medicine, the patients that we treat are extraordinarily diverse. But when we look at our physicians and we look at the people that are running the system and the policymakers, not nearly as diverse. And so when we say to ourselves, hey, we need to be a reflection of our customer, I think it almost challenges us to almost jump over and being a good example for our customers, and to think about our customer's customer, if you will, ultimately the patients, and to start reflecting that kind of diversity and inclusion in our actions and our behavior, so that we can be better. And I think our industry can play an important role in helping all of medicine kind of make some progress in this regard.
It's true that our industry is kind of unique in this sense. We don't only create jobs, but we also treat patients. And that's one extra dimension to take into account. Antoinette, let me turn to you. You have another twist to this as well, I think, because the leadership of your company is also based in Japan. So there is a different element that comes into play in here. So please, back to the initial question is that, you know, our country, the United States, heard a tremendous call to action to address systemic racism. What have you done? What has your company done with also that global element to it?
Yeah, well, first, I think when I listen to what Tom and Mike have described, and you know, the word listening comes up, right? And I think we all think we listen along the way. I do roundtables, so I reflect and say, what is it that we should be doing differently in that listening? And one of our core values across the enterprise is respect. So we built from that and said, respect means everyone's voice is heard and they feel that their voice is relevant. And that latter part is very important. And when one of the things we reframed as we talked about our listening sessions and even the formal structures we have a speak up platform that is intended to get any issue, whether it's a compliance issue or, you know, I'm unhappy with something that it's a safety net that people can't use if they haven't gotten satisfaction from their boss or their HR person or what have you. But one of the things we had to tackle was our organization, like many, did not speak about social issues or politics at work. Right? That's the ultimate of poor form. Religion, politics, you don't talk about that at work. Yet, if you're in healthcare, you can't ignore that, right? When communities of color are dying at 3 times the rate of white communities from COVID, when clinical trials don't always represent the patients they serve, when government policies may inhibit getting real world evidence out in the market. So we spent a lot of time talking about our obligation to reflect the patients we serve. To Mike's point, they are all diverse. And we use phrases like the social determinants of healthcare and how we address that. But the number one elements of those social determinants are the accidents of birth, that you were born female or you were born with different colored skin. So it is tough. But how do you bring those things together? And what I have found refreshing is that my Japanese board, as an example, they want to learn. They want to address this. You know, 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, we had the new emperor coming on board in Japan, and they did not allow his wife, who is a, you know, world-class foreign service professional, to come to the, you know, anointing. So normally you know, good form would say, you don't talk about those things. But so I went right at it with the board because they want to change, but somebody's got to break the ice and set off the bombs. That's the way I'd say it.
You have to do it. That's not it doesn't surprise me coming from you, Antoinette.
Good for you.
My next question in here, I will start with Tom on this question. This one, I'll let Tom close it because you have a lot to add on this next question from what BD has done, Tom. So hold on to this one. I'll start with Mike, then Antoinette, then Tom. And the question is the following. It's about the leadership team that you have in place and how do you ensure that they are working on creating a sustainable change at their level, and how do you hold your leadership team accountable to the sustainable change? So I start with Mike, then Antoinette, and Tom, you'll close on this one.
Thanks. I mean, of course, it begins with leadership, and you know, as leaders, we need to lead by example, and it's so important. You know, the interesting discussion that we got on and said, okay, if we're going to take our game up, what are we going to measure? And I've committed that I'm going to add some measurements. You know, like all companies, we do some external reporting of some of our diversity measures and so forth. But we're saying, you know what, we could and should do more. What should we do? And we made this a dialogue amongst our senior leaders to say, okay, what should Mike have in his performance measures? And matter of fact, what should I have as a senior leader in my performance measure? We're actually going through that discussion right now. And again, this is the opportunity for us to get it right sort of on the total Edwards level, but also, you know, for my piece, right? If I'm a senior leader, to say, what does diversity and inclusion look like for me and what should I be measuring? And so we're going to sort of go at this in such a way where people have a chance to, you know, suggest their own measures, and we'll do some coaching and working on that, but we'll have much more measurement in place going forward, starting next year than we've ever had in the past. And frankly, it's going to be a learning journey. We're going to try and make them meaningful and important and long lasting, but we're not going to be afraid to say, hey, we might have made a mistake and we're going to change, because doesn't seem to be a great roadmap for exactly how you do this.
Yeah, there's, for me, a very personal element with the leaders. We can look at the data and we tend to, in our shop, focus on the one, right? There's the one female intern in engineering, and so I think there's some ways you have to just pull up the org chart and look at it with the people involved and say, does this org chart represent the patients we serve, right? And it's really hard to talk about all the great things you're doing when you have 3 layers that look identical. So I think there's an element of bringing the evidence to life, if you will, forcing the data to look at the data and not justify it and explain it away. But then the other part for me is at a very personal level. We've all lived through this in our lives whenever, you know, we've been the only. And it can be, you know, we've all had that experience. And we often put the burden on the only to break the barrier. And that's a lot of pressure, right? And it can be the only female in the room, the only Black in the room, the only Jew in the room, whatever, you know, we've all had that experience. And there will be times where people say things not without malicious intent, but it's thoughtless or it's hurtful, right? Words hurt. And if you're you're interpreting, oh, they said that because I'm fill in the blank. So with my team, when something comes up, they'll say, well, you know what, we're going to get this thing done and I'll address those behaviors next time I talk to so-and-so or in the performance review. And you have to say, address the behavior now. And if you need help, I'll help you. Because it's those, you know, we now use fancy words like microaggression and they're real. And if you don't have the experience even dealing with them, you know, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so I knew nothing of corporate politics. And I attributed every misstep early in my career to me being just this naive country bumpkin. And I remember talking to a very experienced woman who said, "You're so naive, you don't even realize when they're treating you like shit, because," right? So you are putting a burden on someone who's ill prepared to have that conversation or even realize it. But so you have to work with the leaders. And it's not a male thing, a female thing, a color thing. It is a human thing. We all do it. We all have biases, right? I think I'm funny and I just offended 3 people in the room. So I think taking those things real time, one by one, and then getting people comfortable. We just said it's complicated. None of us want to have a conversation about, have we done something that was perceived as being racist or sexist or harassing, right? That's a look in the mirror like, wow, what do I do? So I think the more we role model that, and I think, model responses that stick, the way Mike characterized it, I like that. The more we do it and have the tough conversations, and maybe you need to go have a beer afterward, but we get the conversation going.
Yeah. Well, Antoinette, as a fellow person who grew up in the country, I understand some of those comments that you made in particular as well too. But first off, if I think about holding my team accountable, it's first thing is how I hold myself accountable, because as you started off the discussion, if the tone from the top is not very clear and that commitment is not there, you're never going to get the progress that you need. It is extremely important to have the tone from the top. And so I have an executive diversity council, inclusion council, actually, that's representative of associates from all different levels of the organization, actually primarily deeper in the organization, who we meet routinely, and they provide feedback on, here's what's going well and here's not what's going well. And Tom, here's the real world. Maybe you're not hearing of what people are thinking on how we're progressing on this and the barriers that we feel across this different group or that group. And here's what we need. Here's how we need your help. So I just had a meeting actually with that team a couple of weeks ago, and that's invaluable, right? And it also makes it very clear my commitment. I meet with each of the ARGs routinely. They have annual plans on how they're progressing, making an impact on inclusion, diversity, and I spend a whole day going through each of their plans and making it very clear my commitment and support for there. And then, mentorship. I probably mentor 10 specifically diverse, great talents from all different levels of the organization. And my job is to make sure they're getting the right exposure and pushing people to take a bet on people that diverse talent, to make sure that they're getting the shot to move up in the organization. And so that's something I personally hold myself accountable to. Like Mike, we've been for many years, we have I&D metrics that are part of our corporate, what we call key driver goals. They then translate into goals for every member of my leadership team, have very specific inclusion and diversity plans. They have annual inclusion plans that I review with them. And as part of our talent reviews, so I have actually this week and the next 3 weeks, I've got CEO talent reviews with every member of my leadership team, where we review their team, and inclusion and diversity and how they're progressing the pipeline of diverse talents is part of those 2-hour reviews with every member of my executive team, including my regional, functional, and business leaders. So that's a way that we hold the team accountable as well. And every one of our ARGs has an executive sponsor from a member of the company leadership team as well, to help make sure that they have the resources and support to advance the agenda appropriately. I'd say just the last thing that we do, which is really important, is we're very transparent on those goals, right? And so everyone knows that when we have our quarterly town halls, we report out, here's how we're doing on diversity. From a cultural perspective, we'll talk about it, but also on the metrics, right, that Mike alluded to in terms of how we're making progress there. I think that's important to share our progress, be able to openly talk about what's going well and what's not. And maybe one other thing, Mike, as you mentioned, the journey that you're going on, the other thing that helps us stay accountable are other metrics that we use in the organization. So as an example, many years ago, we started by putting in, okay, we've got these goals to improve gender and ethnic diversity at these rates. Then we realized that's not working in and of itself. We need to make sure we track specifically for every open job, particularly executive roles, what percentage of interview candidates are diverse. And then we said, that's not enough. Then we said, what percentage of the interview slate is diverse? Because we recognize that having diverse interview panels will lead to much greater hiring of diverse candidates. And so as we've been driving performance in those up, we also see the outcomes continue to improve. But those are all embedded in our HR systems as well, as part of helping to advance our progress here.
Oh, what a great way, Tom, here to close this panel. I've been taking notes feverishly here during the panel. A lot of good ideas, actionable. I'm sure all of the leaders, managers, but also individual contributors here watching this panel are doing the same. I am going to actually watch it again and go again through this. So many good lessons in here. So Tom, Mike, and Antoinette, I'm sure here, I wish the organizers gave us 2 more hours to keep going, but thank you so much. And we look forward in here to continuing this conversation.
Thanks, Nadim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nadim. Take care.